Go ahead, start the Blackhawk. The man with the polished captain's bars on his epaulets sneered, his voice dripping with the kind of condescending amusement reserved for stray dogs and village idiots. You seem to know so much about it. Show us how it's done, old-timer. The small crowd of wealthy tourists, clad in designer outdoor gear that had never seen a speck of genuine dust, chuckled along with him. They were gathered on the shimmering tarmac of a private air charter facility, the morning sun glinting off the sleek black fuselage of a recently decommissioned UH-60L Blackhawk helicopter. It was the centerpiece of their expensive adventure package, a thrilling ride over the nearby canyons. The old man they were laughing at didn't seem to notice. He stood apart from the group, a solitary figure in a faded canvas jacket and worn leather boots that looked like they'd walked 1,000 miles of hard country. His hair was silver, thinned by time, and his face was a road map of wrinkles etched by sun and worry. But it was his eyes that held you. They were a pale, washed-out blue, yet they were fixed on the helicopter with an intensity that was anything but casual. He wasn't admiring it, he was assessing it, his gaze sweeping from the main rotor hub to the tail pylon with a practiced, almost intimate familiarity. He ignored the taunt, his focus unbroken, his stillness a stark contrast to the performative swagger of the charter pilot, a man named Trent, who insisted everyone call him Captain. Trent, clearly annoyed at being ignored, took a step closer. He was a man in his late 30s who carried himself with the unearned confidence of someone who has never been truly tested. His flight suit was a little too clean, his aviator sunglasses a little too big. "What's the matter, Grandpa? Cat got your tongue?" he pressed, projecting his voice for his audience. "You've been staring at my bird for 20 minutes. You must be one of those military nuts, right? Watched a few too many action movies, think you're a real operator." The old man slowly drew his eyes away from the machine and settled them on Trent. There was no anger in his gaze, no flash of indignation. There was just a quiet, profound weariness, as if he'd heard this exact brand of foolishness 1,000 times before. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of his head and turned his attention back to the Blackhawk. This silent dismissal was worse than any retort. It was a judgment, and it lit a fuse in Trent's ego. The laughter from the tourists faltered, sensing the shift in the air. The sun beat down on the tarmac, and the only sounds were the distant drone of a propeller plane and the low hum of a ground power unit, a sound that felt like a gathering storm. The old man remained a statue of placid observation, his very presence an indictment of the loud, empty noise arrayed against him. On the other side of the helicopter, a young man in greasy coveralls paused his work, a wrench in his hand. His name was Davis, and he was part of the ground crew. He was 24, but his eyes held the familiar, distant look of a combat veteran. He'd done a 4-year tour as a 15 Tango, a Blackhawk mechanic with the 101st Airborne. He'd been watching the exchange with a growing knot of dread in his stomach. He'd noticed the old man the moment he arrived, not because of his worn clothes, but because of how he moved. He walked with a certain economy of motion, his back ramrod straight, a posture that discipline had hammered into his spine so deep that age couldn't slouch it out of him. When he looked at the Blackhawk, his gaze wasn't the wide-eyed wonder of a tourist. Davis had seen that look before. In the eyes of seasoned crew chiefs and grizzled old warrant officer pilots, it was a look of critical evaluation. The old man's eyes weren't just seeing a helicopter, they were reading it. He was checking the droop of the main rotor blades, the alignment of the stabilator, the condition of the tires. Small, almost invisible details that told the story of the aircraft's health. Then Davis saw it, the thing that made his blood run cold. As the old man shifted his weight, the cuff of his worn jacket rode up just an inch, revealing a sliver of his wrist. There, faded by decades of sun and sweat, was a tattoo. It was a winged dagger, the iconic symbol of the Army's Special Operations Aviation. Davis felt his breath catch in his throat. It wasn't just any SOF tattoo, the specific style, the subtle details. It was old. It was the mark of a plank owner, a founder. Trent, meanwhile, was doubling down, his voice getting louder, more aggressive. "Look, I'm responsible for the safety of these people," he announced, gesturing to his smirking clients. "I can't have some random vagrant loitering around my aircraft. You're a liability." The old man didn't flinch. He simply stood his ground, his quiet dignity a shield against the verbal onslaught. It was this unnerving calm that seemed to enrage Trent the most. People were supposed to react to him, to be intimidated by his authority. This old man's silence was a defiance he couldn't comprehend. "Are you deaf?" Trent barked, stepping right into the man's personal space. "I said you need to move away from the helicopter." The old man finally spoke, his voice raspy but clear, like stones rolling in a dry creek bed. "The APU exhaust looks hot," he said, his voice low and even. "Bearings probably going." He wasn't looking at Trent. He was looking at the small exhaust port for the auxiliary power unit, a detail no civilian would ever notice. Davis, across the tarmac, froze. He knew that sound, that particular high-pitched whine. The old man was right. It was a subtle flaw, one that even he had barely registered during the pre-flight check. He'd heard the slight change in pitch, but dismissed it as a quirk of the machine. Now, hearing it named, he knew. Instantly, the old man was correct. It was the sound a bearing makes just before it seizes. This technical, accurate observation sent Trent into a new level of fury. Being corrected, and so precisely by the target of his ridicule, was an intolerable insult. His face flushed a dark, mottled red. "You think you're clever, old man? You read a manual once? Let me tell you something. I've flown everything from a Robinson R-22 to this beautiful machine. I have thousands of hours. I am the captain. You are nothing." He poked a finger into the old man's chest. "You don't know the first thing about this aircraft. What's the emergency procedure for a dual-engine failure at a 50-foot hover over variable terrain? Huh? You can't just Google that one, can you?" The old man's pale blue eyes met Trent's. For the first time, a flicker of something other than patience appeared in them. It wasn't anger, it was something colder, deeper. It was the look of a man who had not only faced that exact scenario, but had survived it, likely more than once. "You autorotate," the old man said, his voice flat. "But you don't dump the collective. You hold it, feel for the updraft from the terrain, and use cyclic to trade airspeed for lift until the last possible second. You pray your crew chief has cleared the cabin, and you try to land on the upslope." He spoke the words not like a textbook answer, but like a memory, a scar on his soul. The technical precision, the grim poetry of it, hung in the air, silencing everyone. The tourists looked at each other, their smirks gone, replaced by confusion. Even Trent was momentarily speechless, the accuracy and fluency of the response catching him completely off guard. Just as the tension on the tarmac became unbearable, a black SUV with government plates rolled silently to a stop near the hangar. The driver's door opened, and a man in a crisp, olive-drab flight suit emerged. He was tall and lean, with the sharp, focused energy of a career military officer. On his chest were the silver wings of a Master Army aviator, and on his collar the distinctive insignia of a Chief Warrant Officer 4. He moved with a purpose that made Trent's swagger look like a child's clumsy imitation. He was the FAA liaison and the Army's official observer for the final civilian certification of this particular airframe. His name was CW4 Evans, and his presence immediately changed the gravity of the entire scene. Trent saw him and instantly shifted into brown-nosing mode, a slick, artificial smile plastering his face. "Mr. Evans." "Good morning, sir. We were just about to start the pre-flight briefing. Everything is perfectly on schedule." He gestured dismissively toward the old man. "Just had to clear out some of the local color, you know how it is. This one seems to think he's a pilot." He chuckled, expecting Evans to share in his amusement. But Evans wasn't looking at him. His eyes scanned the group, and then they stopped, locking onto the old man in the faded jacket. The professional smile on CW4 Evans's face vanished. It didn't just fade, it was instantly erased, replaced by a look of utter, profound disbelief, which quickly morphed into something else. A deep, unwavering, almost reverent respect. His entire body language changed. His relaxed, confident posture snapped into something rigid, formal, and precise. He ignored Trent's outstretched hand completely, his gaze fixed on the old man as if he were seeing a ghost, a legend brought to life. He strode forward, his boots clicking on the asphalt with sharp, deliberate steps. He walked straight past the sputtering Trent, past the bewildered tourists, and came to a halt exactly 3 feet in front of the old man. For a heart-stopping second, there was absolute silence. The hum of the APU seemed to fade into nothing. Then, CW4 Evans's body moved with a speed and precision that was breathtaking. He snapped to the most perfect ramrod-straight position of attention Davis had ever seen. His right hand came up in a salute, so sharp, so powerful it seemed to vibrate in the air. His fingers were perfectly aligned, his arm a rigid right angle, his eyes locked forward, staring straight into the old man's face. "Sergeant Major Keane," Evans's voice boomed, sharp and clear, cracking through the silence like a rifle shot. "Sir, it is an honor to see you again." The word "sir" hung in the air, a grenade of cognitive dissonance that blew Trent's world apart. His jaw literally dropped, his mouth hanging open in a silent "oh" of shock. The tourists stared, their minds struggling to reconcile the image of the shabby old man with the formal, worshipful deference being shown by a high-ranking military officer. Sergeant Major. The title echoed in Davis's mind. Not just a sergeant major, but one who, a CW4, a pilot who was practically a deity in the aviation world, would call "sir" and salute with such fierce respect. Samuel Keane simply looked at Evans, and for the first time, the weariness in his eyes was replaced by a glimmer of warmth. He gave a slow, slight nod, the barest minimum of a return gesture, but it was enough. It was an acknowledgement, an acceptance. Evans held the salute for a few more seconds before bringing his hand down with the same crisp precision. Trent finally found his voice, a pathetic stammer. "Sir, you know this man?" Evans turned his head, slowly, his eyes now filled with a glacial coldness as he fixed them on Trent. "Know him?" he said, his voice dangerously low. "Captain, you're standing in the presence of a living legend. You're not worthy to clean his boots, let alone speak to him." He turned back to the stunned group, his voice rising to address them all. "This is Command Sergeant Major Samuel Keane, retired. And for your information, Captain," he spat the word like it was poison, "he doesn't just know about Blackhawks. He is one of the reasons this aircraft exists as a special operations platform. He was one of the first pilots selected for Task Force 160. He flew the original prototypes. He pioneered tactics in night flying and low-level insertion that are still the gold standard today. He has more combat hours in a Blackhawk cockpit than any 10 of your charter pilots combined." Evans took a breath, his chest swelling with righteous fury. "He holds the Distinguished Service Cross for actions in Panama, a Silver Star from Mogadishu, where he flew for 18 straight hours, his aircraft shot to pieces around him, pulling wounded men off the street, and 3 distinguished flying crosses. The procedures you read in your clean little manuals? He wrote them. He wrote them in blood and sweat in the dark, under fire, so that pilots like you could have a checklist to follow." The silence was now a heavy, suffocating blanket of shame. The tourists stared at the ground, at their shoes, anywhere but at the old man they had ridiculed. Trent's face had gone from red to a pasty, sickly white. He looked like he was going to be physically ill. Evans wasn't finished. He took a step toward Trent, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "You asked him about a dual-engine failure. In 1993, Sergeant Major Keane lost both engines to ground fire over a hostile city. He auto-rotated a fully loaded Blackhawk onto the roof of a 3-story building, in the dark, saving the lives of all 12 men in the back. That roof, by the way, was smaller than this landing pad. So, yes, I'd say he knows the procedure." He then turned his gaze to the helicopter. "And the reason I'm here today and the reason Sergeant Major Keane is here is because his old unit asked him to perform the final test flight and sign off on the airworthiness of this machine before it was fully transferred to the civilian registry. He wasn't a passenger. He was here to inspect your work." The final revelation landed like a physical blow. The flight wasn't for the tourists. The flight was for him. Trent wasn't the captain of this flight. He was, at best, a co-pilot, a ferryman for a master. The old man they had mocked was the one in charge. He was the authority. He was the only one whose opinion on the machine truly mattered. The whole sordid morning had been a grotesque inversion of reality. A fool mocking a king without recognizing his crown. Samuel Keane watched the scene unfold with that same unnerving calm. There was no triumph in his eyes, no satisfaction at Trent's humiliation. There was only a quiet sadness. He had seen this before. The arrogance of the ignorant, the pride that comes before the fall. He finally moved, his old boots scuffing softly on the asphalt. He walked past the mortified tourists and the ghost-white Trent. He paused in front of Davis, the young mechanic who had been watching from the sidelines. Their eyes met. In Davis's gaze, Keane saw respect, understanding, and a shared knowledge of a world these other people could never comprehend. Keane gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod, a gesture of solidarity that made the young man stand a little taller. It was a passing of the torch, a silent acknowledgement from one generation of soldier to another. Then he turned and walked toward the Blackhawk. CW4. Evans moved quickly to the cockpit door, opening it and holding it for him with the reverence of an acolyte. Samuel Keane placed a worn hand on the fuselage, a gesture of an old friend greeting another, and then he pulled himself up into the pilot's seat with a fluid grace that defied his years. He settled in, his hands moving over the controls with an instinct born of 10,000 hours in the dark. He was home. Davis watched, his heart full, as the quiet old man prepared to make the machine sing. He knew he had just witnessed something profound, the quiet, unassailable power of a life of service, a dignity that no amount of mockery could ever touch.